I'm currently outside right now, and for good reason, and I'll get to why that's a good reason later on. But firstly, nearsightedness, also called myopia, is a big issue. Not only because it's really annoying and prevents you from seeing stuff, but because, firstly, you can't reverse it, and secondly, it's been increasing in the population of the world. By 2050, more than 50% of people are expected to be nearsighted, I'm pretty sure, which is really bad. So, I'm gonna, through this video, explain to you why it happens and what you can do to take preventative measures. Let's start off with the basics. Imagine this as your eye, and this is an object. So, the object's lights will get refracted by the lens onto the retina, which is this part over here, this back of the eye. Because of the lens, it gets focused perfectly onto the retina, as you can see. And it gets inverted, but that doesn't matter because your brain corrects the inversion. So, what happens if the object is placed closer to the eye? If we don't change the lens, then the object will actually get refracted behind the eye, and that results in blur over here. This is called hyperopic defocus, when the image is projected onto a space behind the eye. So, to fix this, we thicken our lenses. So, for example, move your finger really close to your eye and focus on it. You can see how the background behind your finger gets blurrier, while your finger remains crisp. This is because our lens is changing the way light comes in and refracts onto the retina. So, as you can see, the lens thickens for this very close object, which refracts properly onto the retina. So, look at what happens when we apply the same concept to the periphery. The lens will accommodate for central vision, not peripheral vision. So this results in a difference in defocuses for the peripheries. So for example, relative hyperopic defocus. The center may be fully defocused perfectly. However, the periphery is probably in hyperopic defocus, where the image focuses behind the eye, as you can see. And also, the eye's shape can also cause the same relative peripheral hyperopic defocus. As you can see here, even if the lens refracts the image, basically spherically, the shape of the eye, in this case, it's oblate, I'm pretty sure. No, sorry, prolate, will cause the image to be focused behind the periphery. And this causes relative peripheral hyperopic defocus in the same way as over here. So, our eye can adapt in response to this defocus. The eye can either grow or shrink, and in this case, because of this hyperopic defocus, the eye will want to grow to meet the image, as seen in this figure. Now, remember accommodative lag? Well, whenever you focus on near objects, for example, if you have a screen next to your eyes, like about a few feet away, maybe a meter away, that'll cause accommodative lag from looking at the screen all day and not resting your eyes, as well as relative peripheral hyperopic defocus, because the periphery is, as I stated before, not accommodated for enough as the center of the retina. So the eye will want to grow to meet this object. So, there is a bit of localized adaptation to defocus. So for example, if you had objects in the bottom field of your view consistently near you, and objects in the top field of your view consistently far away from you, then that would cause this part of the eye to not grow because the images far away are being focused properly, but this part, the bottom half of your eye, to grow. And they did a study on this that established this. So, from a mathematical standpoint, the two defocuses are technically indistinguishable. Like, you can't tell them apart if you look at them physically. However, in the settings of our eyes, the eyes will introduce different distortions to the images that do allow you to determine the sign of defocus, whether it's myopic or hyperopic. And remember, myopic is when the image is in front of your eye, and hyperopic is when the image gets focused behind your eye. So, to see what I mean, take a look at this point. Hopefully, you can see it with perfect focus, right? It's clear, you can see the edges are crisp. Now, if you're myopic, or if you're nearsighted, try backing away from it, like really far away from your screen, and you'll see that the image will kind of spread out in some sort of vertices that just appear all around it. To better demonstrate this, you can also close one of your eyes and try it that way. So close one of your eyes and back away from the screen, and you'll see the image sort of like spread out. Remember how that looks. Now, for hyperopic defocus, we can demonstrate it by looking really close at the screen. So go up to your screen and have the screen right next to your eye. Like literally your eye right next to the screen. And you'll see that the image is defocused, but in a different way. Roughly speaking, it's going to have a red border, as well as being flipped by 90 degrees, relative to the myopic defocus you got from backing away from the screen. So here is roughly, very, very roughly, what I mean. These are not accurate, I'm just using them for the point of illustrating how this looks. And I kind of modeled this off my own vision, so this is what I kind of see when I back away from an object, like in myopic defocus, or when I look really close at an object in hyperopic defocus. Notice the blue border around myopic objects, or myopically defocused objects, and the red border around hyperopically defocused objects. This is a crucial distinction. And also notice, the direction the defocus is elongated in will kind of flip by 90 degrees. So this is more vertically oriented, and this is more horizontally oriented. So these defects I listed are caused by two main things. This one, I don't actually know, it just appears that way. One oval for both eyes, basically, flipped by 90 degrees relative to myopic defocus. And here is the more simpler longitudinal chromatic aberration, or LCA. This is when, just because of the wavelengths of our light, the lens will refract the light differently, resulting in different relative focal points. So blue will be defocused in front of the retina, and red will be defocused behind the retina in an emmetropic eye. And emmetropy is just perfect defocus, like you can see things clearly. So we can extrapolate this. In myopic defocus, this entire plane will be focused over here instead of over here on the retina. So this will cause blue to be defocused more relative to red, and this will cause the blue border around objects, which we observed over here. In hyperopic defocus, this entire plane will be defocused over here behind the eye, and blue will actually be clearer than red because it's closer to the retina. And that's what causes this kind of color distortion we can see over here. Next, we need to establish like how the eye actually works. So, this is the front of the retina. This is where the light comes in. The light comes in, goes past these nerves, and gets received by these rods and cones which process color. So it gets processed over here. That leads to outputs which gets processed into these neurons. And these all go to the optic nerve. And there's a hole in your retina. You can't really see it because your brain cancels it out. But there's a hole in your field of vision where the optic nerve is. And behind your retina, behind all these photorecepting cells, is the retinal pigment epithelium, which provides nutrients to the eyes, and the choroid. And the choroid is basically a bunch of blood vessels which make way for the nutrients and also can thicken and thin, just so you know that. And notice these amacrine cells here. They can take inputs from these cones and rods and make outputs in response to them. So bright lights actually activates a lot of dopamine release in the eye. They do this by activating dopamine amacrine cells and encouraging them to synthesize a lot of dopamine, basically. So it all gets processed over here and then passed on to these dopamine amacrine cells to adapt the eye to bright light environments. For example, outside. Like if you look at the sun a lot, for example, you'll start to know how don't look directly at the sun, but if you're outside a lot where the sun is shining everywhere, it might be really bright at first, but after a few minutes to an hour, you should notice how everything gets a lot darker and your eye is more adjusted for outdoor vision. That's because of your dopamine amacrine cells acting to release dopamine, which sets up signaling pathways to adapt your eye for outdoor vision. One of these processes is, along with making your eye more responsive to color cues, is the thickening of the choroid. This part over here behind the retina that kind of cushions the retina. The dopamine aberrant cells will thicken the choroid, and the choroid will push the retina, this part of the eye, forward or backward, depending on whether it thickens or thins respectively. So if the choroid thickens, this part will be pushed forward over here, and the focal plane will therefore be changed, and this will reduce myopia. On the other hand, if the choroid thins, then the eye will be less structurally stable and will actually thin, and the focal plane will be pushed back, resulting in the eye being more myopic. Now, while this effect is very fast acting, like in the matter of minutes to hours, it's very, very, very small, and you can't really notice it day to day. And the sclera is just your entire eye. Like literally all of the white stuff, the white part of your eye basically. That's your sclera. And in response to defocus, over time it can sort of adapt. Especially as noticed in some animals like chicks, they can sort of like shift their sclera around to both shorten and elongate. And this process is called scleral remodeling. The basic vocabulary for it. But all of this isn't really fleshed out yet. These are all just like associations or correlations with scleral shortening and lengthening. But yeah, research hasn't established, I don't think has established a distinct molecular pathway behind scleral remodeling. But anyway, that's basically the basis of how the eye adapts and why myopia has been increasing in recent years, because it adapts to environments and it responds to those environments by shortening, or in a lot of people's cases, lengthening, which results in nearsightedness. So that was all the science and everything. So now let's talk about the impacts and treatments. So firstly, if you aren't going outside, go outside. That is the easiest way to prevent more progression than needs to be progressed in terms of eye lengthening. And that is the easiest way to like almost prevent nearsightedness for any children you have growing up. Just send them outside. It's so easy. This is backed by a bunch of studies. And then secondly, the reversibility. So, as far as we know, nearsightedness isn't reversible at all. Like, there are slight changes that can be made in the choroid that temporarily lowers nearsightedness, but those are completely temporary. And yeah, so we do know that infant rhesus macaques can sort of reverse nearsightedness, but that's in their infancy, and the tendency probably declines as they get older. And for humans, like, it's never been observed before. No single person has been observed in the literature to have reversed their nearsightedness. So that's out of the question. What you can do is focus on further prevention, and I guess you'll still have to wear like eyewear, but you don't have to keep it progressing onto the path where it becomes like severe myopia, where it's like where your eye is like past prescription 6. And that's bad because then you risk like a bunch of diseases like retinal detachment, glaucoma, etc. Okay, thirdly, nutrition. So nutrition, I think there's been some studies that have like a sort of correlation between like bad nutrition and nearsightedness. So I guess just eat healthy. There's not a specific supplement that automatically like reverses or completely stops progression. It's just about like literally just having a basically good diet, like limiting levels of inflammation, like all that type of stuff. Okay, fourthly, so transition lenses. Now, there hasn't been any research on transition lenses, and don't stop wearing your transition lenses. I'm not saying to do that, but I do think that the evidence points to the fact that we should do research on transition lenses and whether or not they affect nearsightedness progression, because they do limit light. And we do know that higher levels of light is correlated to lower levels of nearsightedness progression. So like logically, the best thing to do would be to do studies on that. But don't just quit using transition lenses because of that. I'm just saying there should be research done, and there are probably much bigger factors like going outside in the first place that count more than just like removing your transition lenses. Okay, so fourthly, eyewear does have effects because of how I mentioned before on like hyperopic defocus and those cues to direct eye growth. However, there's too little evidence to say anything about that. So, like, they've done studies on undercorrection, and I think there was like 2 studies, and then there was a meta-analysis, and basically there's just conflicting evidence, and the consensus is you might as well just wear eyewear. It makes you have clear vision, first of all, which is why it even exists in the first place, and there's no like negative, there's not really any clear negative role that it would have on making myopia worse or anything like that. Again, the best thing you can do is go outside. Don't worry about all of these like other factors. Going outside is the biggest thing you can do, and like that's the most researched treatment for it, or like most researched preventative treatment. And fourthly, there is a thing called red light therapy, which actually I did say that no reversal has been documented, but this actually did manage to reverse nearsightedness a bit. So sorry about that. I forgot how it went, but basically you do low levels of like, or not necessarily low levels, but you put red light into your eye like 3 minutes, like twice a day, I think, or something like that. And it's a specific wavelength, I think around 650 nanometers. And then that like supposedly like thickens the choroid a bunch, and then it also prevents nearsightedness from progressing. So if you're really intent of, you know, keeping myopia stable and not having it progressing, then RL is, I think, a good treatment, but that's like really expensive, so it's basically irrelevant for most people. And yeah, there's really not much to say other than that. I think a big reason why nearsightedness would keep progressing despite environmental changes would still be like peripheral defocus still being hyperopic while central vision might be myopic. So for example, if you hold your phone screen up to your eye like this, then even if your central vision is like, it views it myopically with blur, like it's too far away for you to see, your periphery might still be having it defocused hyperopically, so that's too close for the periphery to see, and then that sends the signal for your eye to elongate. So I think that may be a factor, but again, not much research has been done around like that specifically like illuminates the different factors behind why nearsightedness in humans is so much more difficult than nearsightedness or like eye growth in animal studies. Like in animal studies, it's much simpler. Like you give them an environment and they adapt perfectly to that environment. Like again, age is a factor. Infancy, infants have the better advantage with reversing nearsightedness. But I also think like stuff like that, like human-specific habits that we have as a species, like having a lot of close work, is also a big factor. And that's really about it. So this was the first video I have on this sort of science topic. I've been wanting to make it for like 6 months now, ever since I did the research for it for like a different thing. But yeah, thanks for watching. Give any feedback. I'm sorry if I like didn't really teach too well. So if you have any feedback in the comments, feel free to give me that, like any constructive criticism. I'll be happy to accept that and include that in any future videos I do. Thanks for watching.